Welcome to Combat Review, where we analyze combat systems in action games to understand their skill ceiling. Today, we're looking at Elden Ring Nightreign, the cooperative roguelike spin-off of Elden Ring. Combat, at its most basic level, is fairly typical for a melee action RPG, with one light attack chain and one heavy attack chain, which you can use charge or uncharge. Light and heavy attacks very often flow into each other, animation wise, but there are no traditional combos like you would find in a hack and slash or a fighting game. Generally speaking, the light chain focuses on raw DPS, while the heavy chain focuses on posture damage. Enemies have an invisible posture meter that gets chipped away with every hit, and when it reaches zero, they're stunned and opened up for a critical attack. We also have three ways to wield weapons: two-handed, one-handed, or dual wielding. Two-handing boosts our strength scaling and posture damage, but makes us slower. One-handed uses the standard way most weapons are meant to be played, and dual-wielding weapons of the same type gives us a massive DPS at the cost of very high stamina consumption. Because yes, this is very much a stamina-based game. Almost every action costs stamina, and animation cancelling is extremely rare. Most of the skill required to play From Software games comes down to understanding how long your animations last and how much stamina they cost relative to what the enemy is doing at any given moment. The game features three types of physical damage: slashing, blunt, and piercing, alongside generic physical damage that doesn't fall into those categories. It's common for the two basic attack chains to deal different damage types, and even within a single chain, you might see multiple types. At higher difficulties, knowing each enemy's weaknesses and using the appropriate physical or elemental damage becomes crucial. I won't go too deep into elemental damage since there are many types, but they're the usual suspects you'd expect. One important detail is that landing piercing damage during an enemy's attack animation grants bonus counter damage. This bonus only applies to the physical portion of the attack, not the elemental damage. On top of that, our character has two different types of sprint: a faster one that consumes more stamina, and a slower one that's more efficient. From either sprint, we can perform running attacks that skip the first hit of the light chain. This matters because attacks later in the chain deal more damage. But the most important mechanic of all, and the one From Software popularized across the industry, is the game's core defensive tool: dodging with invincibility frames, or iframes. Nightreign features multiple characters, each with their own dodge. The basic dodge, used by characters like the Wilder or the Undertaker, is a roll with roughly 400 milliseconds of invulnerability, which is quite generous for an action game. However, after 16 years of making these games, From designs enemies specifically to bait your dodges, something they've practically turned into an art form by now. So don't get complacent. Enemies will often feint attacks or use moves where positioning matters, meaning where you dodge is just as important as whether you dodge at all. A friend of mine often says that these games are secretly turn-based sometimes, because once a boss starts an attack chain, all you can really do is dodge. A bit like Expedition 33-ish. That's not always true, especially in Nightreign, which is designed for 3-player co-op and where only one person usually holds the boss's attention. Still, some bosses have very high tolerance to hitstun. Like any respectable action game, Nightreign does have hitstun. Applying enough pressure can briefly stun enemies and interrupt their attacks independently of the posture system, though the two are related. Some bosses, however, have hitstun thresholds so high that only very specific attacks can trigger it. And surprisingly, stunning a dragon is harder than stunning a zombie, though sometimes those thresholds can feel a bit excessive. While dodging is a primary defensive option, jumping also has iframes, sort of. When you jump, the lower half of your character gains invulnerability, but the upper half does not. These iframes last almost a full second, which is absurdly long, and jumping costs less stamina than rolling, When facing area attacks like shockwaves or sweeping strikes, jumping is often the better option, and even many basic attacks can be avoided this way if you're paying attention. There are plenty of videos online of players using this mechanic in very creative ways. Additionally, except in certain dual-wielding cases, we can block. Blocking negates 100% of physical damage and a portion of elemental damage, with stamina loss depending on the specific attack and the defensive stats of your weapon or shield. After blocking an enemy attack, attempting a heavy attack will instead trigger a guard counter, dealing damage comparable to a fully charged heavy attack. If you know you can tank an attack or an entire combo, finishing it with a guard counter is a great way to deal massive damage, especially posture damage. Some weapons and shields also grant access to a parry, which requires a short startup window and can leave enemies open to a critical attack without breaking their posture. Knowing which attacks can be parried is difficult without prior knowledge, so parries tend to be fairly situational. The Executor, however, has the ability to deflect attacks, which has almost no startup and can defend against the vast majority of attacks in the game, fully negating elemental damage and status effects like poison or bleed, making it far more practical. As mentioned earlier, the game features 10 classes or characters, each with an active ability, a passive, and an ultimate. Even though Nightreign is a roguelike, you start each round with between 3 and 6 relic slots that define a preliminary build. How you play changes significantly depending on your starting gear. Some relics grant additional or altered abilities, for example, allowing the Guardian to deal area damage whenever he blocks an attack, while others provide more traditional bonuses like increased physical or skill damage. The game also features a wide array of spells and weapon-specific skills that consume a mana-like resource. When using bows two-handed, you can manually aim, and hitting weak points causes extra damage and hitstun. Understanding the RPG systems fundamentally changes the combat experience. As is typical for these games, preparation is half the battle, though player skill and personal expression still matter a great deal. Now we get to the big picture question. How much room is there for player expression, and how long can the combat stay engaging? The core of From Software's combat design is inherited from old-school arcade action games, positioning, timing, and animation commitment. Nightreign expands on this through character-specific mechanics, abilities, and co-op synergies alongside its RPG elements, but its combat is still built on those fundamentals. This has clear pros and cons. On the one hand, you don't have a massive move list or complex combo systems, and sometimes the optimal strategy boils down to repeatedly using a single attack, depending on your character and build. On the other hand, enemies are mechanically demanding, requiring sharp reflexes and pattern recognition. The sheer variety of builds and characters offers a huge amount of replayability, especially given the roguelike structure, where every round is different. Mastering some of the more complex characters, like the Guardian or the Scholar, can take a long time, as their abilities fundamentally alter your basic moveset. On a scale of combat complexity, Nightreign lands comfortably above average. It's not Neo, it's not Ninja Gaiden, but it still gives players plenty of room to improve, experiment, and push to frankly absurd levels of difficulty, in a good way. That said, it's important to be clear. This is combat built on very fundamental principles, and that won't be to everyone's taste. If you enjoyed Elden Ring or its spin of Nightreign, you might want to check out this Souls-like ranking I made a while back. And if you like this video, this is YouTube, blah blah blah, you know what to do.